Welcome to the Asphodel Archives. I'm your host, Charon's Intern, and this week we're talking about the Resurrectionists, grave robbing for medical schools. There's something unsettling about the idea that your final resting place might not be final at all. That even after death, your body could still be taken. Not by some supernatural force, but by men with shovels, ropes, and lanterns moving quietly through a cemetery after midnight. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, that fear wasn't superstition. It was a profession. In cities across Britain and Ireland, gangs of men worked the graveyards the way fishermen worked the sea. They studied burial patterns, watched funerals from a distance, and learned which cemeteries had fresh soil. When night fell and the mourners were gone, they returned. To understand why grave robbing became such a thriving trade, we have to look at the world of medicine 200 years ago. Modern hospitals, surgical standards, and anatomy textbooks didn't exist yet. For physicians and surgeons, the human body was still full of mysteries, and the only reliable way to study it was through dissection. Medical students gathered in anatomy theaters to observe demonstrations by surgeons who cut carefully through muscle and bone, explaining what each structure did. It was the closest thing the era had to medical training. But to do that work, to teach anatomy properly, you needed bodies. Real bodies. The problem was that the law made them almost impossible to obtain. In Britain, the only legal source of cadavers was the bodies of executed criminals. This rule dated back centuries, rooted in the belief that dissection was not just a scientific practice, but an additional punishment. A criminal might face execution. But dissection denied them something even more terrifying in the eyes of many Christians: a proper burial and the hope of bodily resurrection. For centuries, that supply had been small but sufficient. But by the late 1700s, several things changed. Public executions became less common, legal reforms reduced the number of crimes punishable by death, and medical schools expanded dramatically. More students were enrolling, and professors needed more specimens to teach them. The demand for bodies increased rapidly. The supply did not. By the turn of the 19th century, anatomy professors faced a grim reality. There simply weren't enough cadavers for education. Without bodies, students couldn't learn surgical techniques. And without trained surgeons, medicine itself stalled. Where legal supply ends, illegal markets begin. And so a strange and disturbing profession emerged. They called themselves Resurrectionists. The name was almost ironic. In Christian theology, resurrection referred to the miraculous rising of the dead. But the Resurrectionists were not priests or prophets. They were body snatchers. Their work was methodical. After a funeral, they would mark the grave and return after dark. Graveyards were usually quiet by midnight, and the freshly buried soil was easier to dig. Working quickly and silently, they would remove the top layer of earth until they reached the coffin. But they didn't usually dig up the entire grave. Instead, they exposed just enough of the coffin lid to break it open near the head. Then they slipped a rope or hook around the corpse and pulled it upward. The entire process might take 20 minutes, if done well. They didn't take jewelry or clothing. Those were considered property and could bring serious legal consequences. The corpse itself, strangely enough, was not protected by the same laws. In the eyes of the legal system at the time, a body wasn't property, which meant technically it couldn't be stolen. This legal loophole made prosecution difficult. If caught, resurrectionists might be fined or briefly imprisoned for disturbing a grave, but rarely for stealing the body itself. And so the trade flourished. Bodies could be sold to surgeons and anatomy schools for considerable sums. In some cases, a single corpse could earn a laborer more money in one night than weeks of honest work. For many resurrectionists, the risk seemed worth it. In large cities like London, Dublin, and Edinburgh, the trade became organized. Gangs developed territories, suppliers, and buyers. Some even had arrangements with gravediggers or cemetery workers who quietly informed them when a fresh burial had taken place. Medical schools were not innocent bystanders in this system. Officially, many professors condemned grave robbing. Unofficially, they paid for the results. When a body appeared at the back door of an anatomy theater in the middle of the night, questions were rarely asked. Students needed cadavers. Demonstrations needed specimens. And the work of medical science continued. For the public, however, the existence of resurrectionists was terrifying. Imagine burying a loved one and returning days later to find the grave disturbed. The soil shifted, the coffin broken, the body gone. The outrage was enormous. Communities organized patrols to guard cemeteries. Watchmen were hired to keep vigil through the night. Some families even slept beside newly buried graves for several days to prevent body snatching. Inventors developed elaborate security devices for the dead. Iron cages called mort safes were placed over graves to prevent digging. Heavy stone slabs sealed burial plots. Some coffins were fitted with locking mechanisms or reinforced with iron bands. But the resurrectionists were persistent. Where money flowed, ingenuity followed. Despite the fear, the practice continued for decades. Surgeons insisted that medical education depended on dissection, and many believed the benefits to society justified the morally questionable supply chain. But the situation could not continue indefinitely. Public anger grew with each scandal. Newspapers published increasingly disturbing accounts of body snatching. Riots occasionally broke out when medical students were caught with stolen corpses. By the early 1830s, pressure mounted for reform. The solution came in the form of the Anatomy Act of 1832. The act allowed medical schools to use the bodies of people who died unclaimed in hospitals, workhouses, and prisons. It effectively ended the resurrectionist trade. But it also introduced a troubling new reality. The bodies most often dissected were now those of the poor. People who died without family or resources could be claimed by the state and transferred directly to medical schools. The shortage of cadavers was solved. But the ethical problem shifted rather than disappeared. So while the resurrectionists disappeared from the graveyards, the deeper question remained: who truly owns the dead? Is it the family, the state, society? Or does the body become something else entirely once life has left it? The resurrectionists faded into history, but their legacy is everywhere. Every surgeon trained in a modern anatomy lab, every medical student learning from dissected tissue, all of that builds on a foundation laid by stolen bodies. It's one of medicine's darker debts. That progress, for a long time, was fed by those who could not refuse. It's easy to condemn the men who dug up graves 2 centuries ago. And yes, their actions were horrific. But they also existed within a system that valued discovery over dignity. A system that quietly looked away as long as the work got done. The resurrectionists are not just villains in history. They're reminders of how ambition can warp morality. They show that the hunger for knowledge, when unchecked, doesn't just illuminate, it devours. I'm Charon's intern, and this has been the Asphodel Archives. Next week we'll cross another boundary, this time between theft and murder, as we uncover the story of Burke and Hare, the men who decided that waiting for the dead simply took too long. Until then, keep your lantern lit and your conscience steady.